I was obsessed. In the pride, the honors. I had a big wall, and I would put all the certificates, and I was, elected to various honor societies. When we finish with my story of what happened to me in that tomb, people are going to say either God exists or Sottosanti's crazy.
Well, my name is 𝙁𝙤𝙤𝙀𝙀𝙀.
And I'm 𝘼𝙣𝙤𝙤 𝙈𝙘𝙀𝙀.
And welcome to the Anna Film Scoop. From a very weird looking location, we have found the one not too untidy part of the room we're staying in here.
Yes. Where are we staying?
We're in 𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤 Beach.
Florida.
We're on the road meeting the folks.
Top secret missions.
Top secret missions. But anyway, we're still bringing you a great show, and particularly the interview that's coming up in a few minutes.
So what's on the show today, huh?
Well, first the madness. Just
Yes.
when you thought that California couldn't get any crazier, wait till you hear what they are now defining as child abuse. No, it's not starting sex changes on minors, it's parents who object to the process.
Yes. And teachers, of course, your children are safe at schools. That's what we're told. Teachers are now secretly plotting to brainwash your child against your wishes without your knowledge. And brainwash your child and say that the child is born in the wrong body, and we have the tapes to prove it. And Ireland says, ha 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 ha.
You think that's sick?
Yes.
Hold my Guinness.
Yes, and the
ACLU.
American, yes, ACLU says, anything Ireland can do, we can do better.
But we have a very nice and wonderful and inspiring story to balance the madness with John Sottosanti, whose book has just come out.
Yes, a friend of ours, and really
he's a perfect antidote to this particular
antidote
podcast.
to the madness, and who says there are no good comedians in Ireland, as Anne pushes the prompter up. Who says there are no good comedians in Ireland? The country is introducing a hate crime law, and it is more awful than you can imagine. It's almost comedic script reading the...
And we will do a comedic script reading of the Irish hate laws.
So what's happening in California? I mean, basically all you need to know is there's a law in the state Senate that has not been enacted yet, but it will charge parents with child abuse if they don't affirm their trans kids. So if your child, your 5-year-old, comes along and says, "Mom, I think I'm a fireman," and then she says, "Actually, Mom, I think I'm a man," and you don't immediately get her on puberty blockers and the railroad, the swift track to surgery, then you could be charged with child abuse.
And these stories just they keep on coming, and we bring you another story, a really disturbing story.
This was in the Daily Mail, yeah,
from the Midwest. And
so they've managed to get into a top secret federally funded government conference of teachers. So it's a lot of red states now. The government is saying you cannot do this without telling parents. You cannot do it at all, by the way. You can't affirm. You can't tell children they're born in the wrong body. You can't brainwash them. And they discuss their strategies and top tips
to get around that.
To cut you out of the process while cutting their children's genitals off. And Ireland says,
hold my beer.
Yes, hold my Guinness.
Hold my Guinness. Yeah, that's the Irish version of that.
That's right.
So the oldest Catholic church in Ireland, St. Teresa's, have just had a prayer service of belonging. Belonging. But guess who's belonging? LGBT+. And by the way, and we've had our very lovely young friend, Bran Dove, who spoke to us recently on the podcast. She was the one who
Bran Dove, who wrote that 14-year-old Irish girl who wrote the wonderful poem.
And we had that interview.
I am not a dress.
I am not a dress. She talked about, what does the plus stand for? Yes. So this is in a Catholic church. They literally had the celebration of trans and plus, which nobody knows what it means. And if you think that's not bad enough, the state of Florida
we're in 𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤 Beach.
We're in 𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤 Beach. They have just executed 𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤 at Florida State Prison, and whatever you think about execution and all of that.
Let's say what the ACLU said. The state of Florida never provided the medically necessary gender-affirming care to 𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤, causing her enormous suffering and violating her right to be free from cruel and unusual punishment for more than the 30 years that she was in custody. Well, this is what she did. Tell us what she did. And this is only one little bit of what she did, by the way.
These are the two things that she went to prison for. Owen was found guilty on the brutal killing of a 14-year-old babysitter, Karen Slattery of Boynton Beach. And I think this happened actually in 𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤 Beach. And a 38-year-old executive secretary and single mother of two who he murdered
And raped.
raped.
I think it's important to say raped because it's
Yes.
not a she.
Yes.
This is not a she. This
Both
is a
of
he.
these victims
Women
were raped, by
Yes.
the way. And the second lady there, Georgina Worden, her 2 children were asleep in the house when this happened.
Yeah.
And they were basically the children discovered her.
So this
and
male rapist.
Owen confessed to stabbing Karen and raping her, and 2 months later he raped and killed Georgina Worden. He at Boca Raton with a hammer, while her 2 children slept nearby.
So this is the person that the ACLU said was violating her right to be free from cruel and unusual punishment by not giving her gender-affirming care. Moving on. Let's go to the nice interview now, actually. Let's go to the nice interview with John Sottosanti. So John, we actually came across John through a friend, a relative of mine.
It'll come out in the interview, actually, yes.
It was a great find. This is a book, a gentle, kind book, but
with a punch.
A truly affirming book, actually.
With a punch, I would say. With a punch.
And it's a very interesting and fascinating story.
Let's go over that
interview now. So we're joined now by John Sottosanti. John has written this amazing book called Mortal Adhesions. A surgeon battles the 7 deadly sins to find faith, happiness, and inner peace. Welcome to the show, John. Thanks very much for coming on.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Funny how we first came across each other. You and my brother did the Camino together in Spain, and for those who don't know, the Camino is a pilgrimage across northern Spain. I think it's 600 miles. I think you cycled it with my brother, and then we got in touch, and you're in San Diego. You're a surgical periodontist. That's correct?
Yes. That's correct.
So it's a surgeon battles the 7 deadly sins to find faith, happiness, and inner peace. Mortal Adhesions. I want to start sort of at the end. Why did you write the book?
Well, the big question today really is does God exist? You know this better than anybody, but we'll call it the deep state, maybe. Is that a good term to use? I'd rather not see God around because it interferes with their agenda. And what we're seeing in society is a tremendous increase in depression, anxiety, suicide, drug-related deaths. I think we are going to have close to 110,000 or more drug-related deaths, many of them with fentanyl involved. And so there's really despair in the country. You may or may not know that Yale University put on a course about 4 years ago, the happiness course. And they tell you, you can become happy by meditating. And they have a variety of things that they tell you to do, gratitude, which is a good thing. But it's a low level of happiness. And I hate to say this, but even their instructor, world famous now because the course has affected millions of people, Laurie Santos, had to take a year off just recently because of burnout.
Yeah.
So obviously happiness was not of her life.
Well,
I thought funny. I remember, and it's interesting. At the beginning of the book, you talk about this Yale class, and I think actually it's worth just mentioning because I thought it was fascinating that Yale decided to offer this class, and then they were absolutely overwhelmed with the number of students who wanted to sign up. So that obviously there was a thirst there for people to find out about how can I make myself happy.
It's the most popular course at Yale University in their 300-year history.
Yeah, well, that says
Isn't that
something.
amazing?
That says. So, reading Mortal Adhesions, John, I was struck by we some time ago we interviewed Sohrab Ahmari and his book which the Unbroken Thread. And let me read you the introduction to his book actually, because it just struck me. This is your book also, or maybe you disagree. So he starts off saying, "My bad dream runs something like this. Max, who's his son, returns home after finishing college at some elite university. He plans to spend 2 weeks with his parents before striking out on his own as a junior associate at an investment bank or a hedge fund or advertising agency. He says it doesn't really matter which meritocratic colony he chooses. 2 decades of good nutrition, proper schooling, and rich extracurricular activities have yielded a winsome well-rounded young man. Max's clear skin, an easy smile, and the confidence with knowing life's material fruits are ripe for the picking. One night, Max and his friends stopped by for dinner. One is a Southern congressman's glad-handing son bound for Yale Law School. Another has just secured seed funding for a tech startup. Still another is an environmental engineering graduate, has won a Sustainable Design Award and been named as, quote, emerging visionary by a prestigious foundation in Davos. At the dinner, Max's mother and I take obvious pleasure in her son. In him we see our own love embodied and projected into the future. And let's be honest, the fact that his company keeps reassuring us that we have succeeded as parents. Max looks to be a winner in life. Yet the moment he and his friends open their mouths to speak, they talk mostly about money. They boast about entry-level salaries at their dream firms, how long it takes them to make partners, their Fifth Avenue apartments. Well, he goes on, right? And Max pays a certain obeisance to his father's ancient faith. Sure, he tells me he heard mass at the college chaplaincy when he wasn't too busy. I mean, that struck me. I don't know if does that strike you as the theme of your book also? I mean, you were, for all intents and purposes, religious. You had a veneer of religiosity, but you've since come to realize that was almost preventing you from finding God rather than helping you.
I was raised in a family in which my mother was a religious. My father was a scientist, engineer type. Actually, he was born in Sicily. And because he was born in Sicily, and it was at a time when we were living in Connecticut, and he came over when he was 6 years old. But at that point in time, even in my youth, I felt a lot of prejudice against Italians. We were called names such as Guinea and Wop and all kinds of names like that. So my dad wanted me to get all the degrees that I could. And he kept saying, John, be a doctor, be a doctor. If you're a doctor, you're going to get two things. You're going to get prestige and you're going to get money. And so I focused totally on that. I mean, God was in the background. Sure, I made my first communion and I went through all the sacraments that children go through. Didn't mean anything to me at all. I had no faith to speak of. And of course, I went to an Ivy League institution, very secular, and whatever faith you probably go into that university, you don't come out with it. So, and even back then when I went, it was that way, and it's a lot worse now. So I didn't pray, except the first time I ever prayed in my life actually was as a freshman at the University of Pennsylvania. Because what happened was I left my hometown to go off to an Ivy League institution. It was a blue-collar town, very sophisticated, difficult university. And I was a procrastinator. And so I procrastinated right up to close to finals, knowing that I could in 2 weeks read all the textbooks and calculus and everything else and do fine. But 2 weeks before finals, I got a letter from my girlfriend who I thought I was in love with. It was a Dear John letter saying she was dropping me and she had another boyfriend. And I couldn't study. I mean, I tried so hard to go to and I always thought I could do everything on my own, and I just couldn't study. I was going to flunk out of Penn, and I just didn't know what to do. So I went to a little chapel in the Newman Center, and I prayed for 2 solid hours. And at the end of the second hour, all of a sudden I had this peace. It came on suddenly. But for 2 weeks, it lasted to get me through studying. And, obviously it worked because here I am. I've got the degree from the University of Pennsylvania, doctorate degree from Georgetown University, did postdoctoral training at the University of Southern California. So education has always been a part of my life. The second part of my dad's equation was make money. So for 15 years, I made a lot of money. And at the age of 41, I bought a large, rambling ocean view house sitting above Scripps Pier in La Jolla, California. I could see the waves hitting the beach. I could hear the waves in the background. It was a very dramatic house. And I had a brand new Mercedes S-Class, the extended body type thing. My patients tended to be obviously I had all kinds of patients, but I had movie stars. Some came down from Los Angeles. I had at least 3 Nobel Prize winners as patients. I lectured for the University of Southern California all over the world, all fully paid for by them. But I was putting in about 80 hours a week of work to make all this happen because my private practice had grown.
But I mean, this is what struck me from the book, right? you know, you're from an immigrant background, and you were instructed by your immigrant parent or your immigrant father to live the American dream, and you were
Right.
living the American
You
dream.
did it.
Um, and you, as I say, you were on the surface religious. I mean, you weren't. You talk about the seven deadly sins, but outwardly you weren't leading a particularly immoral life, right? You know,
No.
I know
Right.
you're very hard on yourself in the book, right? Now, you talk about
Yeah. No, you're right. I dabbled in the seven dead, but I pulled myself out. I don't know if you read that. Did you read the chapter about the movie star that came down from Hollywood? That type, that type of thing.
yeah, no, you were
I was
tempted.
able to.
You were tempted by lust, but you never consummated that lust. But it is a deadly sin. You definitely had pride. You definitely had greed. But you can describe greed also as providing for your family.
Yes.
You
Mhm.
can pride. It's hard on the on for you almost were the acceptable face of the seven deadly sins.
Pride is the most difficult sin to get rid of. I mean, even to, because if I tell you that I've finally gotten rid of pride, I'm full of pride telling you that.
Yes.
So you can't get rid of it. Well, you can really reduce it a lot, I think.
By the way, how prescient to be talking about pride, by the way, in what they are now describing, and we're all being forced to, to put up with this idea that this is Pride Month. As you say, it's one of the
Oh, there you go. Yes,
one of the deadly sins. I'm very sorry that those two things coincide. Sorry, go on, John.
because of all this success, I thought it was going to go on forever, but it didn't. Because what happened is a lot of things happen within a short period of time. Um, I had an employee embezzle a lot of money from the office. I had a contractor who we paid pretty much in full, but he didn't pay his subcontractors. So I didn't get lien releases, so we owed him $300,000. I mean, it just went on and on. If all these things started happening, and I was under so much pressure that when I was about 45 years old, 48 years old, I just couldn't handle it anymore. I mean, it was total despair, and I was sitting at my home up on the hill with the sky roof opened in the car, and I looked up at the stars, and I said, God, if you are up there, because I didn't know if God was up there or not. I mean, you could say I was religious. I mean, if you can call not being sure if God existed being religious, then I was. But I didn't have a strong belief in God whatsoever. And in fact, I was taking courses at the 𝘉𝙗𝙗 Center on transcendental meditation.
Yes,
I
I
was
want.
going to New Age churches. I was
I
doing.
want to talk to you about that actually, but go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just searching all over the place. So I had an unknown God, and I looked up at the starry sky and I said, God, if you are up there, all I want is inner peace. Please help me. And that was so hard to do. I think it was not only hard for me to do, I think it's hard for everybody to do. And certainly those that don't believe in a God aren't sure there's a God because of, again, it's pride. You're submitting. It's like, I thought I could do it all myself. But the interesting thing is, as you may have seen in the book, is that God is there and God heard it. And it wasn't like God, I think of Paul falling off the horse and becoming blind, and then he gets his faith when the scales are removed from his eyes. It all happened in a day or two. With me, it took like 12 years of things that began happening, culminating in a spiritual vision on the Camino de
Yeah.
Santiago, which is a highlight of my life.
So you
Changed
can.
my life.
Yeah. So you kind of went on the Camino. Well, you went. You were a friend just suggested it to you, and you were kind of skeptical, very skeptical, and and in fact, it was a tragedy that happened. One of your children that prompted you to go there in some kind of bargain with God to try and help your son. And then you were on the Camino, and as you say, I think you said in the book, applying your engineering brain to the Camino and to the various miracles, and there was an incident with chickens, as I remember, or roosters, and
Well,
then
the
something.
chicken thing is really, is really an ancient legend. If anybody does the Camino de Santiago, and you have two ways to do it. It's a very dramatic trip, by the way. Even if you're not religious, if you like history, if you like scenery, if you like legends, then go on it. But there's a legend, in one of the towns about the chickens that came back to life. I mean, did I believe that? No, it seemed absurd that these chickens came back to life. But the reason I went on the Camino, it was threefold. Number one, I didn't even know what it was, but a friend said his wife was going to walk across Spain for 6 weeks by herself. And I thought of my wife going across to Spain. I mean, she's going to be walking in the dark at times, not near a place for lodging. It wasn't like it was all laid out for her. You have to find these things called refugios. So why would his wife do that? So I bought books on the Camino de Santiago. That was one thing that happened. Second thing that happened is one of my good friends came down with very serious blood cancer, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and was potentially going to die from it. And he was so depressed, I wanted to pick him up. I asked him if he would come with me on this trip, and he thought I was crazy. He said, I can't walk around the block. I just got through with chemo and radiation, and you want me to walk across Spain? I said, no, I don't want you to walk across Spain. That takes 6 weeks. I want you to ride a bicycle across Spain in 12 days.
Oh, my God.
He still told me I was crazy, but he did it. And then, so that was two things. And the third thing was my son called me. They had been wanting to have children for 2 or 3 years. When she got pregnant about a year and a half earlier, she told the world that she was pregnant. Then she had a miscarriage. That was extremely devastating. She got pregnant again, and she only told her parents, and us, and told us to not tell anybody. And then she miscarried again. The good news, I don't want to get ahead of myself. Mark called and said, the doctor told us we will most likely not be able to have children. That was devastating because out of 3 sons, only one was married, and it looked like only one was going to get married. And so he was my only hope. And he just said, we can't have kids. So, the family name, the Italians want to carry on the name, and they want big families. And it was just very, very devastating to me. So right away, when I bought that book on the Camino, because I thought about the guy's wife leading on it, I went through every little town that I'd be traveling across, and I came across this unusual town, a town of a population of not more than 10 people called San Juan de Ortega. And it so happens there's a saint buried there that lived in the 12th century. But the story is very interesting because in the early 1400s, evidently the church dug his body up and they opened the coffin. And according to legend, honeybees flew out of the coffin. Honeybees are a symbol of fertility. And so from that moment on, word spread around Europe. Obviously, the communication was poor, but however it did, it spread around Europe, and people would make the trip to his tomb to pray for children. Well, a very famous person did that, Queen Isabella of Spain. Queen Isabella was married to Ferdinand. Ferdinand and Isabella sent Columbus across the ocean. So she was an amazing lady.
And very devout. She was very devout.
She had a daughter, and then wanted a son badly. For 7 years, could not get pregnant. She finally gets pregnant in the 1480s, and she miscarries. She hears about San Juan de Ortega and makes a pilgrimage to his tomb, immediately gets pregnant and has a son 9 months later, and named him Juan after the saint. Then she wanted to have another child, a daughter. Well, it didn't matter if it was a daughter or son because she had her son. So she goes back to the tomb, prays to the saint again, gets pregnant immediately, has a daughter, and names the daughter Juana. Again, all because of dedication and thankfulness to the saint. So everybody else that goes on the Camino de Santiago, all they care about is completing the Camino, getting their certificate. You get a beautiful certificate in Latin when you finish. You have to prove that you didn't cheat. You didn't get in supposedly on a train or a bus or a car. And so I've got my passport and I get it stamped all along the way. But most of the people in our group, and they have the bicycle company had a van following us all the time, and they kept saying, "Don't you want to ride?" And they tempted us because that's what we were paying them for. And I'd made this bargain with God. God never answered me, but in this little chapel right at the beginning, I said, "Dear God," I said, "I want a grandbaby. I didn't care, male or female. I want a grandbaby." I said, "If you give me a grandbaby, I will ride every bit of this community Santiago. I don't care how sick I am, how bruised I am. I will never get into that van."
And funny you should say that, because you did end up rather bruised, didn't you?
Oh,
I was. And that's the story. I mean, the day that I was most exciting on the entire trip was the day that I was going to ride my bicycle into the town of San Juan de Ortega. And I was racing a buddy of mine up a tiny road that had hardly any traffic. To the top of the hill, there were two stone buildings, one on either side of the road. So there was no shoulder. I had to go straight through. And this man appeared out of nowhere, and he basically motions to me to move over to the side of the road, which by the time I saw him, I looked up and this Mack truck was coming straight at me, and I had nowhere to move. So I purposely crashed into a building. So I hit the building rather than the Mack truck. I fell down right there. And as I fell, the back tire of the Mack truck went within a foot of my ear. And so I was badly bruised, but I got right back on the bike. I had a big welt on my knee, and I made it into that town of San Juan de Ortega. Do you want me to tell you about that experience now, or
Yes,
later?
yes. I mean, I suppose.
and the bike was okay, by the way. The bike wasn't injured.
Yeah, I was able to get back on the bike. They may have pounded the dents out of it, but
Yeah, but before we talk about what happened to you in the church, I just want to really set the scene, because, as I'd say, yes, you were tempted by the 7 deadly sins, and yes, you had some of the 7 deadly sins, but you didn't lead a terribly immoral life. I mean, you led a mutiny on when you were in the Air Force. You led a mutiny, but in the end, you were proven right, and the senior officer lost his job, and that was because you wanted to do the right thing. So you were doing the right thing. Now, from what I can read in the book, as you got older, you kind of lost your way and you became consumed with honors and money. But you can also say I became consumed with providing for my family. Now, your family may have disagreed with that, but
yeah, but I took it well beyond the amount of money my family needed.
Yes.
I was obsessed. I really was. In the pride, the honors. I mean, they were. I had a big wall, and I would put all the certificates, and I was elected to various honor societies. When we finish with my story of what happened to me in that tomb, people are going to say either God exists or Sottosanti's crazy.
Yeah.
yes,
He's a lunatic.
yes,
Well,
And what I say is, I don't think I'm a lunatic.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
I
tell
practiced surgery in the same town for 40 years. I didn't run from town to town or state to state. Never got sued, which most surgeons do, because you're dealing with nerves and blood vessels and all kinds of unusual things every day. And I'm married now to the same woman for over 50 years, 3 kids, three grandchildren. And I was elected to various honor societies. I was a president of multiple organizations and professional societies over my career. So most people say he's a sensible guy. And I published multiple scientific articles in the literature.
Absolutely.
You can go to PubMed and plug in J. and particularly if you put J. Sottosanti in bone, that was my interest. And I actually got patents
yes.
on a bone regeneration technique. And
Well, tell us, without further ado, tell us what happened, because I think our audience would be very interested to hear what happened when you went into the church.
We pull into the town, starving, because we've been riding all morning. And so we sit down in the one little restaurant that they had to have lunch. And my buddy, Mike, the guy that had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, disappears. So I'm eating my sandwich, and he comes back and says, "John, drop your sandwich right away. You get down to that church." He said, "Because I have cancer, I went over to Lourdes, which for people that don't know, it's a healing site, shrine type of place, maybe 100 miles from the beginning of the Camino. So he goes to Lourdes to pray for 3 days. And he said, I just came from Lourdes, which is supposedly a very holy place, but I have never felt the presence of God the way that I did in the tomb of San Juan de Ortega. Get down that church right now before anybody else goes, because everybody's eating lunch. And he said, go in the tomb immediately. And he said, you're not going to believe it when you get down in there. So I do. I run down there and I go into this church, which was really interesting. And I go immediately down the steps into this tomb. And it's all dark. All I could see is these votive candles on the floor. And on the upper, there are 2 levels. I'm on the upper level. And it smelled of moisture and mold. And I've got this bleeding knee. The moment I walked in there, I've never done this in my life because I hate kneeling. I hate kneeling in church. I kneeled on the wet stone on that knee and I never felt the pain. I was just in awe of something that caused me to kneel. And I'm kneeling there and I said, well, why are you here? You're here to pray for a baby. So I just started praying, and I'm looking down at the casket. I sent you, Phelan, some photos you may want to put up at some point. And so I'm looking down at that casket. And of course, as my eyes are opening, I'm seeing that casket. And then I'm looking at the cross across the way, that dark cross. And I'm looking at it and praying. And then all of a sudden, right in the middle of the dark cross 5 or 6 feet tall, smaller cross, a couple of feet, 2-3 feet tall at the most, I see a cross of blazing lights. I mean, it was blazing. It was a fiery cross. And then it divided immediately. It was like if you've ever seen a video, which I'm sure you can get on the internet, of a sperm going into an egg. Then the egg divides, and now you have the mother egg disappears, and you have 2 cells. And then they divide. Well, that's what happened to the cross. The cross divided, and 2 crosses moved out to the side, except the main cross, the first cross, never disappeared. So I'm looking at 3 blazing crosses. The outer crosses divide. I'm now looking at 5 blazing crosses. They divide. Now I'm looking at 7 blazing crosses across the whole room. I think, it's got to be some weird Disneyland thing. I think I tripped something when I came in, and the Spaniards have got an opening behind me and are showing a video of blazing crosses, on the wall across from me.
The
So
scientific
as a scientist
explanation.
and a mathematical engineering mind, I look behind me. It's a solid wall. Then I say, well, what could it be? And it was rhythmic. 1 cross, 3 cross, 5 crosses, 7 crosses, and then it stayed. And what could it be? Maybe my glasses are reflecting light from the votive candles down below. So I went to take off my glasses. Well, back then I only read with glasses, so they were in my back pouch of my cycling jersey. Then I had no answer, and I gave in. I submitted. It was a Holy Spirit moment. It was a gift, a total gift. And I prayed probably for 20 to 30 minutes all by myself. And I felt the most amazing sense of peace and certainty. When I left that tomb, and the only reason what happened was in my mind, my rational mind kicked in after 20 minutes, it's a guess. And it said, what if they leave without you? We had 24 miles to ride. The moment I said that, the crosses didn't disappear. They went 7, 5, 3, 1, out. Exact rhythm, almost as if a metronome was doing that. I can't explain it. I took photos later when we back, half hour later, when the whole group went back with the lights on. That's where those photos came from. And I would not delete those photos from my camera for years because it changed my life. I could not explain that. And I left there knowing that my daughter-in-law would get pregnant and I would have a grandson. Sure enough, within 2 weeks or 2 to 4 weeks after I returned, she was pregnant. 9 weeks later, she had a son, Tommy. Tommy is a senior at Yale University. And then she had multiple children after that.
So that changed her life. How did it change your life?
It changed my life dramatically. Well, I immediately believed that God does exist, number one. That's important. I mean, if we went through the American population and said, do you believe in God or not? It used to be like 93% would say yes. Now I think it's down into the 70s. But if you believe in a Christian God, it's probably down around 50%, whereas it used to be 80 or 90% because we now have the God of the universe. We have so many people that have left the churches, not just any particular church, all the churches. And we have a very secular society that basically doesn't want God to exist. And so that I see that as a real problem. But I, from that moment on, believed that number one, God existed, and number two, that God really cared about me. And I think God cares about everybody. I don't care if you're in a prison and you committed a murder. I think God cares about you and wants you to repent and know that He loves you. And I firmly believe that. So I pretty much have changed my life dramatically, not only in terms of regular church attendance for sure, but monthly confession, spiritual advisor, all things. Most of the books I read today often have a spiritual influence on me.
How has it changed your day-to-day life? How have you approached life differently? What difference does that? What are you saying to people? This, how will it change their lives in a day-to-day basis?
Well, the last chapter of the book, I think you'll see the example of a situation in which I had 8 years after the Camino, I developed advanced prostate cancer. And it was a very difficult time. The only time I could compare it to was that terrible anxiety that I had at the University of Pennsylvania. So terrible anxiety. But my faith was able to pull me through. And I, immediately began going to daily mass, and I ended up going to Lourdes. That's where I met your brother. He was with the Northern Ireland Cancer Group. And I had an amazing experience in Lourdes. I would say I had an emotional healing, if not a total physical healing. I did have some treatment, so I can't say yes, but I had amazing results. You'll have to read volume 2, which isn't written yet, to know all the details of what happened. But here I am, 18. The cancer was 2008. This is 15 years later, and I'm in great health. And
Well, wonderful, wonderful. So we're going to probably wrap up now, but is there anything else that you would like people to know about the book? It's called Mortal Adhesions.
Well, I talk a little bit about the 4 levels of happiness. Everybody wants to be happy, but the 4 levels of happiness, what is happiness? I used to be a Charger fan. And what they do, they left San Diego. So I lost my happiness. No, actually, I wasn't very happy because I didn't win very many games. That's level 1 happiness. That's immediate gratification. Level 2 happiness is a comparative happiness. I compare myself to you and others. My house is nice. It's big. It overlooks the ocean. Yours doesn't. I have a bigger car. I got this award. I won the tennis match. You lost. It's a continual. I'm happy because I'm a good tennis player. I'm happy because I have all these awards. But it's very self-centered. The third level, the higher level of happiness, is when you start helping other people. So now I'm very involved with helping students that can't afford education. I have a number of many religious nonprofits that I devote to. And then and the fourth thing then is when you believe in God. And the fourth level of happiness is when you can answer the question, is there a God? Does God care about you? And what's the meaning of life? Why aren't we asking that more often to people? What is the meaning of life? I'm not asking you, but what is the meaning of life? And that's a big question. And one of my favorite books is Viktor Frankl's book on Man's Search for Meaning. It's a great book. So I'm trying to be happy. I'm trying to help other people. I'm trying to be faithful to God and do what God wants. I think that today people do not believe in the biblical definition of sin. Totally ignore it.
Correct.
If there is a God and you ignore sin and you just do what you want to do, and there is a hell, I feel for you.
Funny enough, I think a strange. This is going to sound weird, but a strange. We've been talking recently on our podcast a lot about this trans issue. And, the only way I can describe what's been happening, and I have friends who unfortunately are having to go through this with their children, are trying to fight this. The only word description is diabolical, is, something from the devil, something so evil.
It is.
And I think, bizarrely, this could be something that could create some kind of revival, some religious revival, because suddenly people are realizing that the Bible, it's biblical. It's so evil. It's got a biblical feel to it because it's it's just demonic. It's not.
Well,
it's not even like
sacrificing.
But it's almost like it's just not like anything else. It's not. It doesn't have a comparison. It's so evil that you can't. It's basically biblical, and it's funny. I've a friend about film, in California, and he's constantly saying to me, I'm not religious, and he's a Jewish background, and I'm not religious, but he's been going through this stuff with his children, with crisis with his children during COVID and all of that, and he starts saying to me, and I'm not religious, and and I'm saying fine, that's fine, and then he goes, so in the Bible, this guy, honestly, this is what he says to me. So in the Bible, and then he went on, and I'm Jewish, and I'm not religious and whatever. And then he goes and he says, do you know what Jesus said? And I remember just saying to him, and I was right in front of my eyes. I'm watching this person converting himself, right? And I just said to him, because he's very upset by what's happening, and he was trying to find a context for it, trying to find some hope. And the only place he could find anything that made any sense was the Bible, which was really, it was kind of gorgeous to look at it and hear him. And I just said to him at the end, I said, look, I know you're not I said to him, I know you're not religious. I said, but you know what my advice is to you? I think you should pray. And now he writes, when he writes to me and we're talking about his children and all of that, he says to me, and we had a very upsetting thing happened recently to us. A friend of ours died very suddenly, and he wrote and he said he was praying for us. And I'm thinking, so that somehow in the midst of all of that, it's that I think that there could be a religious revival based on what's happening, because something different is happening now that I feel like hasn't happened before.
I totally agree with you. I think we're going to switch back.
Okay.
On
that
happier note.
Thank you very much, John, for joining us. Tell people again the name of the book and where they can find it.
Yes, please.
So Mortal Adhesions, Amazon. Just go ahead to Amazon and plug in Mortal Adhesions. The only book by that name.
There it is. Yeah.
And there it is.
You'll find it.
And we'll show that out.
Mortal, MORTAL.
Mortal Adhesions, and we'll put that up in our show notes as well.
Okay, mortal versus eternal. Adhesions are the addictions, the 7 deadly sins that stick to us. And things like alcohol, etc., are all addictions, and they're adhesions that we can't get rid of when we can't find God, because we are so stuck to all these attachments in this world here. That's my message.
Thank you so much. And we look forward, by the way, to seeing you again down in San Diego soon, I hope.
Right, we'll look forward to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All the best.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we needed that. We needed that palate cleanse.
Yes, so Mortal Adhesions, please buy the book. Let's get it to the #1 Amazon bestsellers. We've asked you to do that before, and you know what? You have done it. So let's go to the comedic bit. First of all, so Ireland is introducing hate crime legislation, and what you got to understand about Ireland is anything the UK does, because they've got this inferiority complex or whatever, this post-colonial hangover. If the UK says, and literally the UK says, we want to be carbon neutral by 2050, Ireland goes, we're going to be carbon neutral
tomorrow
by 2035 or 2030. So Britain has introduced a hate crimes legislation where you can be arrested for singing kung fu fighting, because 2 Chinese people complained. That is not a lie. They were singing kung fu fighting. They were arrested, had the DNA taken, and everything for possible hate crime. So Ireland is going to now introduce a hate crime that's even more draconian. And this is Branduve pointed this out, the lady who read her poem, the 14-year-old. Hatred. So this is the definition of hatred.
According to the really smart people in Ireland.
So you can be prosecuted for incitement to hatred, right?
And so here's what hatred is. Hatred means hatred against a person or a group of persons in the state or elsewhere on account of their protected characteristics, or any one of those characteristics. Protected characteristics shall be construed in accordance with Section 3. We're not even going to give you Section 3. Yeah. Here's what I learned out of that film. We are living in a completely mad world. And by the way, if you don't have protected characteristics, which unfortunately, Phelim, you and I don't think have protected characteristics, because I think we know what protected characteristics are. So if you're a white, middle-aged lady and gentleman of a certain age and a certain skin type, I don't think we've got any characteristics that'll be considered worth protecting by these hatred law people.
I was at the doctor last week, and he said if I lose 3 more pounds, I will no longer be obese.
Oh, so you're in a protected class, are you?
I don't know. I'm fat now.
Look at you being fat, Phelim. So fabulous.
So by the way, I like this. I feel like this was written by Kamala Harris, actually.
Hatred means hatred.
And then the hatred is in well, she put it
hatred.
Up. Hatred means hatred.
Hatred.
That's in the law. Hatred means hatred. So that's how it's defined. So you've incited hatred. Well, what does hatred mean? It means hatred. But what does hatred mean? It means hatred. So
all that
Kamala Harris. Okay, I want to do Raccoon Gate. Right.
Very quickly, we're going to have a little bit of Raccoon Gate at the end of this show. So basically, our wildlife sanctuary at the back of our house has become a little bit more of a wildlife
Let's just say our borders were not secure. And you could take this, by the way, as a kind of metaphor for the border debate. And as I kind of did on that wonderful app, Nextdoor, which in sane parts of the world, Nextdoor is a place where you go and provide food and care for people who are in difficult times. But here in Venice, California, it's a toxic mess. So I have a camera at our cat flap or dog flap or the doggy door, whatever you call it in America.
So we can monitor the in and outs of the cats.
Yes, particularly when we're away. We have home sitters, but I just wanted to be careful. So anyway, the other day I saw the camera wasn't right exactly, but I saw an unusual. I thought that's not our cat, but it looks like our cat. I saw these ears and this, and then I realized, oh my gee, it's a raccoon. So I was able to speak into the camera and scare the raccoon away that time. I got them to close the cat flap, and next thing the raccoon comes back and starts aggressively attacking the cat flap. So then I start shouting at him through the camera, and he comes over, smacks the camera and knocks it down. But I wrote on Nextdoor at midnight that night saying, can anyone recommend a local raccoon removal service? Have a rather aggressive one in my backyard who's causing problems. And then someone immediately wrote, raccoons can't be removed. It is illegal, and illegal's all in caps. And I said, if they come into my house, I think they can. And then somebody else wrote, I'll take him, where is he? But then somebody wrote, all caps, maybe she has babies, just give them space. And then Tracy wrote, how is he aggressive and how is he getting into your house? Do you have a doggy door? If so, secure it at night. Do you leave the dog or cat food in your yard? If you do that, you're attracting all wildlife. Guilty a little bit. I then wrote and said, Tracy, so I have to choose to close my cat flap because a raccoon decides to take up residence. I have 2 cats, Scaredy Cat and Top Cat. They use that flap. Why should they have the freedom taken away? Because a raccoon interloper with no documentation, I added that, but decides to truck up. I didn't come to America to have my cat freedom restricted. Talk about blaming the victim. Then somebody else, Robert Andrews, wrote, very funny, I can rent the raccoon a room. No Wi-Fi, but there's a Gideon's Bible.
Anyway. That's very, very Venice.
Yes.
Okay, we've come to the end. We've come to the end of the show for this week.
Okay.
And we are on the road. Top secret missions going on here, but we will bring more of that to you very soon.
Yes.
So see you next week.
Some wonderful project. Bye.
Bye-bye.